Great, thank you. All right, well, this is wonderful. Thank you for inviting me to this event. Really enjoyed listening to all the other presenters, and I'm going to finish up by just sort of going through some practical information about nest boxes. For those of you that either have nest boxes, and these would be specifically for songbirds that I'll be talking about today, or if you decide you might like to try some nest boxes on your property to see if it might be a good option for you. As Shelley said, I am a staff research associate at UC Davis and with the Museum of Wildlife, Fish and Conservation Biology. And next slide, please. And in 2000, as a grad student, I started a project whereby we put up about 200 nest boxes along Poudre Creek, which is our sort of stream that runs by campus here. Pretty degraded stream, bordered by a lot of agricultural land uses, but the stream itself is kind of an interesting habitat. It's a little ribbon of riparian habitat in this agricultural matrix. And a lot of people were looking at the stream and wondering what kind of habitat values it might supply for wildlife. And that was where my research was involved, was wildlife habitat along this agricultural stream. And as part of this project, we were noticing that there weren't very many cavities, natural cavities in the riparian corridor. A lot of the old senescent trees and snags had been removed or had fallen down and weren't being replaced by other larger trees. So I just kind of thought, well, what would happen if we put some nest boxes up? What kind of results might there be? And so we put up about 200 nest boxes along about 9 different trails from upstream to downstream, about 20-mile run of creek. And just started learning about nest boxes, didn't know much about them, trial and error, bringing students, and we all have learned. And since 2000, these boxes are still in operation. We have an active internship program that helps us to maintain and monitor the boxes. And we've produced about 14,000 fledglings of 7 different species that all use the same box, which you can see here in the photograph. It's a standard North American bluebird style box, and 7 different species have nested. The 2 predominant species are tree swallow and western bluebird, and I'll talk more about those in detail. We also hang our boxes from trees, as you can see, and we use a kind of a telescoping pole lifter to bring them up and down out of the trees for monitoring and maintenance and that sort of thing. It keeps them safer up out of harm's way and helps keep the predation down on the boxes. So it's been a really nice method for this area, which has enough limbs to support them. In an open setting, you might need to do something different, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So next slide, please. And then in 2019, 2 years ago, we started noticing that the bluebirds, which had been coming back into the region in great numbers as a result of the Poudre Creek work, were starting to come into our parks and green spaces in Davis. And so there was a movement to put some boxes up in some of our parks, green belts, and have the community be involved in monitoring and maintenance of these boxes. So as you can see, we have boxes both in trees where trees are present, and we've also put them up on poles in areas that are more open. Some of the poles, like the one in the lower right picture, are about a fixed pole, about 6 feet tall. And those are ideal for open spaces because the birds can fly in and out. Bluebirds and tree swallows like them quite a bit. And then on the upper right-hand side is a telescoping pole apparatus where we have 2 poles that slide in and up and down, one inside the other, that are attached with a pin in the open position. And these boxes can go up to 9 or 10 feet high, which is nice for getting them up out of the way in actively air places where there's a lot of visitation, and it also helps prevent predators and that sort of thing as well. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background, and again, I'm talking about songbird nest boxes. You've seen barn owl nest boxes, which are fabulous and a great tool in an agricultural setting. We're focusing on the songbird nest boxes, and this is a nest box at Blue Heron Farms. It's as you saw, mounted on a fence line, and these are some tree swallows that are visiting this box. So a nest box is a man-made enclosure provided for animals to nest in. Can be birds, it can also be bees or bats will nest in boxes. And as a caveat, most cavity nesting birds do prefer a natural cavity, which is generally excavated by a woodpecker or natural processes like limb breakage, that sort of thing. But with correct design, nest boxes can be a good replacement, especially in areas where natural cavities are lacking or few and far between. Next slide. So why are they important? Well, as I mentioned, loss of old trees and snags has reduced substrates for natural cavities. And there's a couple woodpeckers here that are responsible in large part for making these cavities. But the other part of the equation is invasive birds, non-native birds like the European house sparrow and the European starling have moved into North America, and they have found it quite to their liking. And they are both cavity nesters, and they often will take over what remaining natural cavities are available in an area. So, in the house sparrow, the European house sparrow is different, of course, than the three sparrows that we've been talking about today. Those are native sparrows. The house sparrow is a non-native species, and it is a cavity nester, and it is quite aggressive in taking over and usurping cavities from other birds, and actually can kill those other birds to drive them out. And the starlings, of course, also will take over, and then they have impacts on agricultural systems too, as we all know or can find out more about. So the thing about nest boxes is you can make the hole small enough to prevent starlings from getting in, which is a great boon. House sparrows, not so much. They're small enough to get in, but with careful monitoring, you can identify their nests before they lay eggs and control them at that point. The other good thing is that house sparrows are generally more abundant in urban areas or places where there are buildings. So in an open field or riparian habitats, we don't encounter them quite so much as we do, say, on the Davis Nest Box Network, which we have to be more careful. Next slide, please. So which birds use nest boxes? Well, this often depends on what area you're in and the type of habitat that is surrounding you. Of the 85 North American cavity nesters, about 36 will also use nest boxes, and that's from the East Coast to the West Coast. Of course, here in the West, we have our own suite of species, and in the coast, the suite of species might be slightly different than here in the Central Valley, where I'm located. Here in the Central Valley, some of the big ones are the tree swallow and the western bluebird, house wrens, white-breasted nuthatches, oak titmice, and ash-throated flycatcher, which is primarily a riparian species. You probably won't get that much in a farm setting. And so it's a variety of birds, and what you want to do is before you start your project is to research the birds that you might find in your area, and then design the boxes and the settings for those specific species that you might want to attract. Next slide, please. So just to kind of show you what you might see if some of these birds take up occupancy in your boxes, the tree swallow adult, and then the next column is what their nests and eggs look like. And then the third column is what the chicks look like when they're either close to fledging or post-fledging. So the tree swallows are very easy to identify. They have beautiful white eggs, and they often put feathers in the nest to line the nest and make it soft comfortable for the chicks. And the bluebirds usually have beautiful blue eggs. Sometimes they're white, so don't let that throw you if you think you have bluebirds, but you have white eggs in. And so those would be those two. The next slide, please. So the house wren has a very interesting strategy. They fill every available cavity in their territory with coarse sticks, like in this photograph. And then the male will sing and invite females to join him in his territory, and she will decide which of the stick-filled cavities she wants to take up, and she will line it with finer grasses and twigs, and then lay her eggs. And the rest of the cavities that are filled with sticks are unavailable for other nesters. They've essentially removed the competition by filling boxes up with sticks. So that's one of the strategies. If you do have house wrens in your area and you want to make your boxes available to as many birds as possible, you would want to wait for a little while and see which cavity or box the house wrens took up, and then remove the sticks from the rest of them so that the other birds can also use them. So there's lots of little ins and outs of monitoring. At the end of my presentation, I will provide a bunch of resources and references to some of the really great online references online that you can go to find out all the ins and outs about nest boxing. And so there's plenty of information out there to help you. Next slide, please. So just the last two, ash-throated flycatcher, white-breasted nuthatch, just to show that a lot of birds put fur in their nests. They line their nests with fur, again, to make a soft, comfortable bed. There's also thought that maybe the fur helps deter predators because they smell the fur of, say, a skunk or some other species that's already been used in the nest, and then that will deter them. The jury's still out on that, whether it has any effect, but they certainly do it, and a lot of birds do. So it must have some sort of adaptive value. And plus, there's lots of fur around that they can find. So next slide, please. So one thing to consider is the right bird, the right box. We've been really lucky, as I mentioned, that 7 different species have used one type of box that we've used, that we're using. It's the North American bluebird style box with its distinctive dimensions and features. That's partly because I think that cavities are at such a premium that birds are really keen on using just about whatever they can find. But it also shows that they're adaptable. But if you wanted to, specialize in certain species, then you would want to make sure that the boxes that you put up had the right dimensions, the right configurations, the right hole size to accommodate and to meet the preferences of that particular species. And here are some online plans that you can explore to your heart's delight, because there are so many, and it's amazing how many different designs of boxes there are out there. But just to mention that this one seems to work quite well. So you can always go with the NABS style box. Here's a picture of a house wren starting to fill this little box with twigs, just to show you how industrious they are in doing that. Next slide, please. So just a few things that make a good nest box. Well constructed, of course, natural wood, thick walls, about 3/4 of an inch thick, provide good insulation, both during cold weather and warm weather. Entrance hole of the appropriate size. I mentioned that you could make it small enough to admit most songbirds, but not the starlings. And that would be 1 9/16 inches is what we use for our boxes. The entrance hole needs to be far enough from the floor that, say, scrub jays or other birds that might perch in the entrance can't reach down in and snatch chicks or eggs out. So if they're too close to the hole, sometimes predators or other birds can get their head in and pull things out. Of course, extended and sloped roof to keep the rain out. A recessed floor and drainage holes to keep the interior dry. That's something that's really important. You can see in this picture that the floor is recessed a bit up into the body of the box so that the moisture coming down along the outside of the box won't wick back up into the bottom and make the nest area moist and colder and wet. So that's something easy to do, that you can help keep your box warm and cozy. Rough or grooved interior walls to help the fledglings get out when they're ready. We find you don't really need to put the grooves in, that just a rough surface on the inside of that front wall is enough. Ventilation holes up in the top, or open areas like a slit or slots where you can get ventilation from through the top and the bottom. It helps a lot in our hot California summers. Front or side panel opening, either one is fine, whatever you like. Just something that you can open up completely and scoop out the nest material that collects in the bottom of the box. And then no outside perches for these boxes, because you don't want to create places for predators or other birds to sit. All the cavity nesters don't need a perch on their box. They just fly right to the hole and go in. Next slide, please. So there's a lot to think about where and how to place a nest box. These are some pictures of some different predator guards and things that you can put on, or sun baffles, and all of that is online. You can read about it. I just put it in here to kind of show you what the options could be. You can mount boxes on poles or fences, or hang them from tree limbs. Generally, hanging or pole mounted boxes are safest. Sometimes on the fences, the predators can get in a little better. One thing I didn't write here, but I want to mention, is that the boxes should be spaced at least 200 feet apart if you want them to be available to the same species, because you want to be able to accommodate the territorial distances of a bluebird. For example, if you were going for all bluebirds, you'd want to put all your boxes at least 200 feet apart. If you want to have other species, you can pair the boxes more closely together. So you might, if you put them 15 to 25 feet apart, you could get a bluebird and a tree swallow, for example, nesting together. So something to think about in maximizing your space. Direction, same with the barn owls. They like it facing east or north, the hole, so it gets the morning sun, and it kind of helps cut down on the heat gain in the afternoons. You can put heat shields up if their boxes are out in the open and tend to get too hot. Great for organic farms, because it's better to not have boxes in places where herbicides or pesticides are used, both because it depletes their insect prey, but also because it can have impacts on the birds themselves. Next slide. And when to set up your nest boxes. I get this question a lot. People will come up to me and say, "Oh, it's March. I want to put boxes out for birds." And I say, "Yeah, it's kind of late, because they've already been prospecting all winter. Now they pretty much know where they want to put their nests. Better if you do it in the fall, which gives the birds the whole winter time to prospect and to look for those locations." And even given that, though, it's good to not be discouraged if the birds don't take up occupancy right away, because sometimes it does take a year, 2 years before birds will feel comfortable enough with this new feature in their environment to start using it. Next slide. So, and then the most important part, I think, of nest boxing is monitoring, because you want to make sure that these boxes are functioning in the way that you have planned for them to function, and that they're providing a service for birds, and then a service for you in your farm or your home or your wild area, whatever it is that you're trying to bring birds to. It's a lot of work, and that's one of the reasons why we have an active internship program where the students can help us monitor our 300 plus boxes throughout the breeding season. Every 7 to 10 days, they go out and check on the boxes. You want to, early in the season, you want to make sure you don't go too often, or that you don't open a box if it looks like birds are newly sort of prospecting on that box. If there isn't a nest in there, and it's early on and they're kind of checking it out, but they're kind of nervous, you just stand back and just wait and come back later if it looks as if they've taken up occupancy, because it will put them off and they may never come back if they're deterred too early. Once the birds have settled in, you can open the boxes to check on the contents. You might want to tap the box lightly before you open it to give any incubating adults the opportunity to fly out. Sometimes they still don't fly out. Sometimes they'll just be sitting there when you open up the box, which is kind of fun and exciting. And you just sort of peek in and say, oh, hi, and then close it and put it back and come back another time. Try not to spend too much time with the box, either down off its limb or open. A minute is about right. Count the eggs and chicks if you can, and look for any signs of problems. Of course, you'll also see if there's been any predation or any problems that might have occurred since your last visit. Be able to recognize and remove house sparrow and or starling nests when you open your box. That's really important. So look at pictures online or elsewhere so that you can tell, because you want to remove those house sparrow nests as soon as possible before they lay eggs, and certainly before the chicks hatch. Because after the chicks hatch, then you have to actually euthanize the chicks based on regulations. And so it's better just to try to not even go there at that point. Catch them soon. And sometimes with house sparrows, you have to keep evicting them because the males are very tenacious. And they'll just keep building nests. So it usually takes 2 or 3 times sometimes to finally get them to give up. Clean out the boxes at the end of the season. And then the last thing is that woodpeckers will often enlarge entrance holes, especially during the winter, so that they can get in there and have a nice cozy place to spend the winter. So when that happens, the hole will be big enough to allow starlings in. And that's another reason to monitor your boxes so that you keep those hole sizes small. If it does get enlarged, you can put a metal plate on the front, similar to what we've done here in this box. Just screw it right on the front and that'll bring that size back down again. It also helps deter any future excavations. Next slide, please. And that's my last slide. These are 3 great organizations. The California Bluebird Recovery Program I've been involved in since 2000. It's a local program with great volunteers. There's actually some of the members are on this call today, on this field, the virtual. And they have lots and lots of great information and are very helpful. North American Bluebird Society likewise has tons of information, nest box plans, monitoring plans, data sheets, you name it. And then the Cornell Nest Watch is a great program that actually takes data, as does the California Bluebird Recovery Program, by the way. It's a great organization to send your nest box data to. Both of these, Cornell and CBRP, will accept data on number of eggs produced, chicks, fledgling species, and it all goes into these citizen science databases that then everyone can access and that are also used for research and more providing information for other projects and research projects too. So definitely hit those up, and I'm here for questions as well.